Bore pawb, y croeso I digwyddiad heddiw. Welcome everybody and good morning. Welcome to today's event. Thank you very much, Donna, for being first person to say hello in the chat. You've read my mind, encouraging everybody to say hello and say who you are, where you work and where you are calling us from. Here is our final panelist, so that's fantastic. Hi, Nina. Sibani is just joining us, so I will start and get started with the introduction. So many of you will know the IWA already. Sometimes there are a few people who don't know who we are, so I am going to explain who we are and what we do. We're Wales's leading independent think tank. We're a membership organisation. We're funded by our members, independent trusts and foundations, and the events that we run. We're really focused on supporting the development of a strong, confident democracy and a successful, clean, green and fair economy for Wales. My name's Oriel Miller and I'm the director of the IWA. In our events programme, we aim to do this by convening and sharing perspectives from different backgrounds, different locations and across boundaries, whether physical or perceived. Our aim is to ensure that people attending our events feel better informed about existing challenges, aware of what those are that are on the horizon as well, how the issue is contextualised more broadly and plays out locally, and then that they feel inspired and able to take action in their own professional and personal spheres afterwards. We really try and convene panels whose members come from very different perspectives and sectors, so that together we can clearly articulate what the issues are on that particular topic and be pragmatic and constructive about a way forward. We also support policymakers in all levels of government to understand how policy affecting Wales can be better informed and shaped by the lived experiences of people across the country, and to support advocates and campaigners to better engage with the mechanisms of devolved policy making, so that their ideas and challenges are picked up and acted on. Acting on is crucial. Better policy should lead to better implementation and a far more positive impact on people's lives, which is what all this is about. Sounds easy, doesn't it? But actually it's really important so that we can be effective, which is why we're honing in on economy and democracy as our key strands of activity. And it's also why I'm particularly delighted to be kicking off our first event in our new 3-year partnership with Bangor University. Our shared aim is to focus on the particular economy of North Wales, as well as the big ticket issues that affect all of us in Wales, wherever we are, whilst exploring how they play out differently in North Wales. We've got ideas up our sleeves already for future events, but we're of course keen to hear from all of your expert views as to the issues that you'd like us to explore together over the next 3 years. So do please get in touch if you have ideas you'd like to share. Diolch yn fawr. While we're starting out online today, our intention in this series is very definitely to hold physical events in locations around the country, North Wales and elsewhere, obviously, bringing the viewpoint from North Wales to other audiences and locations as COVID and the related restrictions allow. We also want to make sure that the overall series is as accessible as possible, and Zoom is great for lots of that as well too. A little bit of housekeeping first. Obviously, many of you will have done umpteen webinars on Zoom. You'll know that you're muted by the host, and we're going to use the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen for questions, please. We really encourage you to say hello. It's great to see everybody saying hello in the chat already. Please do remember that chat and questions are all recorded. We will be putting a recording of this session on our YouTube channel later. We're also live tweeting. We're going to have a 2-hour session this morning, and we're deliberately having a 15-minute break halfway through so that we all avoid Zoom fatigue. If you feel inspired to tweet, and we hope you do, you can at us at @IWA_Wales, and we'll put that in the chat now. And we suggest using #IWABangor as a hashtag. Yeah, video and audio of today's event will be made available via our YouTube and podcast channels. We find actually a lot of people listen to our stuff again. We get a lot of listens back while people are off on their wellbeing walks, in particular, or doing something else. So that's great. I'm really pleased now to introduce and pass over to Professor Iwan Davies, who is the Vice-Chancellor of Bangor University, also a Fellow of the IWA, who'd like to add his own welcome. Iwan.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Oriel, a chroeso chi gyd i'r seminar cyntaf yma ac mae'n heilog ar y fennau. It's a great pleasure for me as Vice-Chancellor of Bangor University to welcome you all to this first seminar in a series of seminars that Bangor University is partnering with the Institute of Welsh Affairs. As Oriel has said, it is really important to present evidence-led perspectives to inform government policy. And actually that's the purpose of the seminar series, to really surface issues which may be awkward issues, but which are issues which need airing and also debate. And indeed, that's the purpose of this first seminar, Taxing Twilight, the Health Economics of North Wales. I'm really delighted to be part of the partnership with the IWA for the next 3 years. As Oriel has said, I'm a fellow of the IWA and I've been a personal supporter of the IWA since its inception, and value greatly the contribution that the IWA makes to the policy landscape here in Wales, genuinely as a critical element and surfacing sometimes very difficult issues. What an amazing 2 years we have had. It's 2 years since the first lockdown in 2020. Brexit, then the pandemic, COP26, war in Europe. Never has it been more appropriate than to quote Lenin, of course, when he says that there are decades when nothing happens and days or years when decades happen. Off-quoted that particular observation. At this time, when we're entering into a profound new era of global disruption, we need to focus on what we're about, and particularly as universities. And I'm much taken by the words of the 18th century German philosopher Gotthold Lessing, who declared about the purpose of universities in this era, that were God to offer him the truth in one hand and the search for truth in the other, he would choose the search. And if that's what we are about, is searching for understanding. And that's the purpose of this lecture theatre series. In 2019, the Welsh Government commissioned the OECD to produce a comparative review looking at future options the Welsh Government might pursue in relation to regional economic development post-Brexit. This review, which was entitled The Future of Regional Development and Investment in Wales, was published in 2021 and contains some of the most up-to-date regional economic data for Wales. In the report, the OECD identifies a number of what they call mega trends, which are not particularly surprising: demographics, declining and aging populations, technology, digitalization and automation, and of course, the environment. In relation to the UK, the OECD points out that it's one of the worst examples amongst the OECD nations of inter-regional inequalities. And some of these points, of course, also are pertinent in relation to Wales, because in the 2017, they talk about the GVA per capita in Cardiff being 180% higher than that of Anglesey, which I'm looking out at as we speak this morning. The top 10% of regions in the UK are 4 times wealthier than the bottom 10%. And the bottom 10% includes Conwy, Denbighshire, and Anglesey. Economic inequalities are also reflected in health inequalities, with similar significant differences in life expectancy and healthy life expectancy between and within regions. Morbidity rates or a place like Rhyl, for example, for men are significantly lower than the rest of Wales. So demographics are a particular issue for Wales, and for North Wales in particular, which is, I think, the focus of today's seminar. The OECD refers to what is sometimes called the elderly dependency rate. This is the percentage of those aged over 65 as a proportion of those aged between 16 and 64. The average figure across the OECD is 25%. In Wales, it's 33%, but North Wales has some of the highest figures, with most of the region above 35%, and Conwy, the highest of all, at 45%. So as a university in North Wales and for North Wales, Bangor University is particularly concerned with the health, well-being, and equality, which is the topic of today's seminar. As a university which is promoting and indeed in the process of establishing the North Wales Medical School as part of the response to some of the huge policy challenges here in North Wales, I'm particularly proud of the work of our academicians in the university. And one of the panelists today, Rhiannon Tudor Edwards, is one of our stars. She is a key contributor to the strategic thinking behind our North Wales Medical School, and we are about really delivering for the communities of North Wales. So I'm really looking forward for today's seminar. I'm looking forward to future events and a focus upon particular needs, North Wales within the context of Wales and the world. Diolch i chi, and back now to Oriel.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much indeed, Vice-Chancellor. That's fantastic. And I think a really useful reminder of the context in which we all found ourselves. It's not just that local context, it's very much that wider picture too. I'm going to introduce our panel next and then hand over to Rhiannon and Professor Edwards afterwards. So Professor Rhiannon Edwards is Professor of Health Economics and the Founding Director of Health Economics Research at Bangor University. She's also co-director of the Centre for Health Economics and Medicines Evaluation and leads the Public Health Economics Research Group, which takes a life course approach to the methodology and conduct of economic evaluation of public health interventions. She has published collaboratively over 200 peer-reviewed articles, reports and book chapters on health economics, including co-editing the 5th in the series Handbooks in Health Economics, Applied Health Economics for Public Health Practice and Research, which is an established course textbook and published by the Oxford University Press. So welcome, Rhiannon. We also are delighted to welcome Dr. Sibani Roy, who's a medical ethicist and the founder and chair of Networking for World Awareness of Multicultural Integration, a community interest group based in Conwy, which is raising awareness of community cohesion and social integration through education and cultural engagement globally. Sibani is also a member of the Community Health Council and the chaplaincy team at Bangor University, offering a multi-faith pastoral care and support to students and staff of the university, and is also a former mayor of Colwyn Bay Council. So welcome, Sibani. I'm delighted to welcome also Mario Kreft MBE, who's chair of Care Forum Wales, a professional association of primarily independent sector care providers and care professionals. With over 500 members across the country, Care Forum Wales is widely recognised as the voice of the independent sector in Wales. Amongst other things, Mario is also the Welsh representative on the board of the Social Care Institute for Excellence and sits on the ministerial board overseeing the new Social Services Wales Bill. He's the founder and director of the award-winning Pendine Park Care Organisation. So croeso, Mario. Kerry Cunnington is a community facilitator for Cymru Bro Festiniog, which is a social enterprise bringing together a community of local social businesses to improve and promote cooperation between community enterprises and businesses in the Bro Festiniog area. Kerry's got a wide-ranging experience of working with and developing community-led economic development projects, and was one of the founders of Antistiniog Bike Park in 2007, before moving on to work as a social enterprise manager with GISDA, which is an absolutely brilliant charity I've visited, also supporting vulnerable young people in North West Wales. So welcome, Kerry. Really looking forward to hearing from you about your work later on. So I'm going to hand over, we've got a brilliant panel, all with different perspectives, lots of things to share, and I'm sure a really interesting conversation to follow. So I'm going to now ask Rhiannon, please, to talk us through your thoughts on the economy, health, well-being and well-becoming also of North Wales. Rhiannon.
Bore da pawb, a diolch yn fawr am y gwahoddiad. Dwi falch iawn I agor y sgwrs bore yma. Maria, if you'd be kind enough to put my first slide up. Thank you very much. My first statistic at the moment is that I'm one of the 1 in 16 with COVID this morning, so please forgive me for sounding a little scratchy. I'm very much here in spirit. I want to acknowledge, first of all, the excellent introduction of our Vice-Chancellor and the kind words from those of you who've introduced me personally. I've been very proud to work for Bangor University now for over 20 years. And I want to acknowledge 2 other people here this morning. I've spoken this week with Hugh Lloyd-Williams and Llynos Harp Spencer because I wanted a number of perspectives in preparing this presentation this morning. Finally, I want to also acknowledge an excellent document produced on the North Wales Economic Framework, which I think the Vice-Chancellor alluded to. Now, this is a document with the link here for you. I think any board that calls itself an ambition board is off to a good start. We should have many more ambition boards. Please, could we have my next slide? Thank you. So what an extraordinary place North Wales is. I was down in the Bay in Cardiff last week, and it's a million miles away from rural North Wales. And I think we have to think of North Wales as an infrastructure intersection linking Europe through Holyhead, and then we have excellent connections through to the Northwest, and then we link down to South Wales and West Wales. We are a food producing area, which I think is going to prove increasingly important as we try to strive to reduce food miles. And we are an extremely desirable destination for holidays now, in what is becoming known as the experience economy, which often involves scary things like zip wires and bouncing on trampolines down in the mountains. But this is in addition to having Snowdonia and the highest mountain in England and Wales. So it's an extraordinary area. We have higher education institutions and further education colleges right across North Wales, and they play an important role in employment locally, but also in getting our local young people to access higher education, particularly if they haven't had the greatest start in life. So I think we're going to have a medical school here up in North Wales, which I think is going to be incredibly important for addressing some of the staffing issues in Betsy Cadwaladr, filling posts of consultants that have been difficult to fill. So I feel, having lived here for 25 years, that in preparing for this talk, I've actually learnt quite a lot about North Wales that I didn't know before. Maria, my next slide, please. So this is a diagram produced by the Office of Budgetary Responsibility. I was chuckling this morning about 6:30 this morning when I heard that Rishi Sunak gets a little irritated by the OBR because they speak truth to power, I think is probably the way to look at it. And I have used this diagram over and over again. I mean, it's couple of years old now, but with the blips that the pandemic have produced, it still stands. And it shows, in terms of thousands of pounds per head, the tax revenue and public spending on health, social care and education through the life course. And the message I hope you will take away from it is that we don't spend very much on young children. We don't spend an awful lot on teenagers. We spend virtually nothing on people my age in their 50s. And then through need, we spend an awful lot on older people. And so the comments of the Vice-Chancellor about us having a particularly high ratio of older people to those of working age is very pertinent here. Now, I've chosen in this talk to focus on the people in the middle of this graph who are of working age, because Maria, if you'd like to move my slide forward, please. We are going to end up with a time of a falling working age population. Now, before I get to that, I just want to pause for a minute. I've grown up in a time prior to 2008 when I think we expected economic growth to increase. We expected things to get better. And as the Vice-Chancellor alluded, actually this has been a really tough time and we face a time where we have a decade of austerity, and we now have a war to face with, and the NHS and social care are coming out of a period, a very, very challenging and unprecedented in our lifetime period of dealing with the pandemic. So if we could have the next slide, please. So as I said, it is extremely important to recognise the context in which we are having a reduction in our working age population across North Wales. So there has been fallout from Brexit, with a 12% reduction in a value of our trade for the UK. And these are things that are difficult for families on the ground, and then they're extremely difficult for those organising services as well. We also are facing unprecedented fuel increase costs, which will affect food prices. I mean, I am a glass half full person, but it is tough to be jolly at the moment, because these are real things that are going to affect people who are only just about managing on the ground. So if we could have my next slide. Thank you very much. I think we have to view whether the work we have is good work. And we have to think about whether the sort of jobs that are in the caring industry and are in the tourism industry and in the green energy industry can be real opportunities for North Wales. Something that concerns me is that we build an infrastructure in North Wales, which means visitors come and have a fantastic time. As Aurea said, she'd had a good holiday last summer in North Wales. But that infrastructure of city centres and town centres needs to be good enough that people want to move into the area to work and they have a good time despite the visitors. I don't want it to be a kind of empty experience of visitors coming and having a great time and then people on sort of pretty minimum wages servicing that industry. It doesn't feel right, and it doesn't feel culturally right, and it doesn't feel that it's an economically a good idea. So if we could move to my next slide, please. Thank you very much. So I want to move to this concept of resilience, building resilience, because I think we need to think about the fact that it's not just Wales that's facing a reduction in the number of people of working age. And again, you know, remember that definition of working age is stretching into older age now. I read an excellent book by Camilla Cavendish about extra time, which is the idea that actually our middle years are stretching now into our 70s and people are choosing to work a bit longer. And so really that is a movable feast about also with increased pension dates as well. So we have to think here about how we can make jobs really appealing to people to move into the area, that we can provide resilient opportunities for training in green energy. And I commend our university for taking a strategy in research which focuses on green energy with foresight of the way this might be really important in North Wales in the next 10 years. And I think we also have to recognise, I noted on those attending the session today, that there are some from small and medium enterprise organisations and the third sector. You know, we have a lot of small enterprises in North Wales producing the most amazing high-end food, really specialised food and drink from North Wales, really innovative. And this also involves agricultural diversity, because we have to face the fact that North Wales is an agricultural area of food production and management of land. The only reason that the mountains look so fabulous is that we have sheep up there grazing rhododendrons off them. And yet we have changes in agricultural payments coming around following Brexit. And anybody listening to the radio earlier this morning will know that fertilisers are over £1,000 per tonne. So food, even though food prices at the gate are going up for farmers, they face much higher costs. But so farmers are diversifying into into holidays and into other specialised food production. This provides employment. I also want to make sure that we recognise that the care industry, and we have representatives here this morning from third sector and social enterprise and Welsh Government relating to care, largely but not exclusively for older people. There are younger people who require care packages going through life, those living with disabilities and chronic disease. And we need to make caring a career, a respected career, and that it has a career path of progression, and it is one that people will be happy to do. I think we're all cognizant of that we don't want to be dealing with 0 hours contracts, but actually building resilience in the workforce for working age people is how we're going to support our older guests. Some of these are local older people living in rural North Wales. Often they want to stay in their own homes and need care in their own homes, which involves transport. And we know that fuel costs are going up. But also we are also able to welcome across North East Wales to areas of Rhyl and also to Llandudno, more affluent older people who come for a nice holiday. So it's such an interesting place. And I think to think strategically about supporting people of working age is how we will then tackle the health and care needs of the future. Briefly, I mentioned earlier that BCUHB has some unfilled clinical positions, which we hope the medical school will help attract those interested in a research career and attract young doctors and healthcare professionals with Welsh language to stay and serve the local population who would appreciate bilingual care. Okay, my next slide, please. So again, I just think we need to think again about context. I am a big fan of Professor Sir Michael Marmot, and the point he has put forward is this issue of neighbourhoods. And the Vice-Chancellor raised this issue, that we have inequalities at neighbourhood level across North Wales. Areas of Rhyl, Wrexham, surprising me, Conwy. 40% of children are classed as poor in areas of Conwy. And we have patchy areas of Anglesey as well. So there are, and Carnarvon. So we have to think about locality when we're thinking about addressing issues of growing inequality, and that translates into growing inequality in health and healthy life expectancy. It's of note that for the first time, life expectancy is now plateauing and even falling for young women, where we've seen life expectancy increasing over time. I want to speak for 1 minute about the just managing families, because they're going to be hit very hard by fuel and other food costs. And this is where employment is so important to keep people in North Wales. Buying a house is pretty tough as well. I mean, if we look at areas like Glenmaris, 60% of the homes there are now Airbnb or second homes, and this becomes very difficult for locals who want to stay and live in North Wales. I mean, I know we're not alone in this across Wales, and it's a testament to it being a very beautiful place for people to come and have a holiday, but it does impact on the need for planning for the future for young people. So I think I just have a couple more slides. I want to turn us, please, to thinking about GVA, which is the gross value added of a region. So the value of what's produced in a region minus its costs of inputs. I want to think about what already is being discussed, I know, in local government documents, this idea of the wellbeing economy. And I think as an economist, I can say there's a really sensible reason for doing this, because if you can keep people well, develop their well-being, and then they make less demands upon primary care. And we're talking about a National Health Service that now it will take 10 years to actually meet the cancer backlog going forward. So then finally, I think I'd like to turn to this concept of well-becoming, which is the idea of we don't just measure the outcome now, we think about outcomes for the future of how I am now in my 50s will determine how well I am in my 60s and 70s. So health economics has very much focused largely on fairly immediate outcomes, and I think if we can just change the lens to think about if we keep people active and in their own homes, they can live and age well, and that if we can help prevent some of the problems that come with poor lifestyle habits. But I am also cognizant that if you are living in a very difficult circumstance, it becomes very difficult to co-produce your own good health. So I discussed with Oreo the idea of challenging the panel to come up with 5 things to action or to plan to do to promote resilience. My final slide at the moment, I think, please, is just some contact details, and to say, you know, I really do appreciate the opportunity to be part of today. I have some suggestions for those 5 things, but I want to keep them back, because what we want today from the panel is suggestions and from the delegates. So diolch yn fawr I chi, and I hope, Oria, that that's got us off to the sort of start you were hoping for.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed, Rhiannon, that's fantastic. So lots to pick up on there in the conversation. I'm going to come first, if I may, to Dr. Sibani Roy, and ask you, Sibani, please, to pick up on that challenge from Rhiannon. What would be the 5 actions that you would take, given your particular perspective, to build and promote resilience amongst the resident population of North Wales to ensure economic well-being, thinking that resilience is about enabling people's ability to cope both with the sort of shocks, the one-offs, and then the ongoing stresses of a situation, but also that uncertainty, because what we've heard so far from both Rhiannon and from Iwan as Vice-Chancellor is that massive uncertainty that faces us all. You know, we thought we were coming out of COVID, we're clearly not there yet, and there's a lot of big ticket issues in that mix. Sibani.
Thank you, Ariane. Well, I am still suffering from COVID-19 myself. It comes and goes, never ends. And outcome of the pandemic is that, to begin with, from my own experience, we had a lot of volunteers when COVID-19 was on, because we have been helping community with food and other services. That time it was okay. We had the volunteers who never bothered about isolation or whatever it is. Now, since life is getting back a bit because COVID-19 restriction is easing off, they have all gone back to their own jobs or lives. So there's a shortage of volunteers, staff everywhere. Yesterday I was booked for train to go to Cardiff to attend some meetings, which never happened because train services has been irregular because short of staff. That is that. And we all know about a high rise of petrol prices, food prices. People are finding them very, very difficult to survive. That is the thing. And that is about pandemic. And I've got other points as well. That about medical school. I fully support that. We need one full-fledged medical school, the medical institute in Bangor. Also, reducing differences between, reducing inequalities between North and South Wales, which would be as far as possible. Also, infrastructure in North Wales. We have to try for more social engagement within the community. Sometimes ago, and quite elderly medical consultant, known to me quite well, and he said, why this medical professional don't come or stay? Even if they come, they don't stay here because of lack of nightlives. And he is a very elderly person himself, but that was quite telling. And another one is, in my own view, cottage industry. We can try to develop cottage industry. We have got wealth of heritage in arts and crafts. Why do not promote economically?
Great, thank you very much indeed, Sibani. So some really interesting stuff we can pick up on there, particularly in terms of the staffing and volunteer shortage as we come out of COVID and people are going back to their jobs.
It is an acute problem.
Okay. Infrastructure in North Wales, social engagement in the community, and how do we support SMEs? How do we support cottage industries more broadly? Mario, let's come to you next, please. We've picked up a lot of issues throughout Rhiannon's presentation around care. The ball is your court, really, in terms of what those 5 actions would be in terms of promoting resilience across North Wales. I can see in the chat that Nina is getting going from Wrexham on her own priority actions, and I'd encourage everybody else to follow Nina's brilliant example, so thank you. But Mario, over to you first.
Thanks, Aurea. Well, first and foremost, I think I'm delighted to be part of this with the IWA and obviously the Bangor University. And I think this whole approach to, you know, the importance of democracy, we're seeing that firsthand on our television screens every day. And bringing that down, if you like, to the discussion today, I mean, it seems to me that one of the first actions we need to consider is that local democracy. If we're going to talk about neighbourhoods, we need to really bring down that decision making to areas that can actually make a difference to people's lives. And I think, you know, in terms of North Wales as a region, you know, it's got a larger population than Malta, it's got a larger population than Luxembourg, and you know, nearly 750,000 people. You know, one wonders as a first gambit, really, as we go forward, do the way that we run things in North Wales, is it actually the best for our communities, for our health, social services, economic health, and so forth? So I would just throw that one out, because I think one of the key things for me, and I was talking to some colleagues yesterday about this, thinking, you know, what I might be saying today, keeps coming back to communication. You know, we almost need to be able to look at all of the good things that are going on, look at the ideas and almost put them, somebody said, almost put them in a great big mincer and actually communicate single clear messages that people understand. And I think we've seen this very much in the COVID 2 years. There has been so much information. Let's be clear. The communities have come together, local authorities, health boards, the Welsh Government has really understood social care in particular, very different actually to experience in other parts of the UK, if I may say. So there's no question about, you know, a blame culture, or we should have had more or whatever. But I really do think that issue of communication and making sure people understand, you know, the values that we have, those messages that communicate, and it then spreads on to things like we've talked a lot already, or we've heard about, you know, the importance of the social care workforce. Absolutely vital. A social care workforce and social care itself is the foundation of the NHS, because of course what it does is stop people actually, you know, unnecessarily going into possibly into hospital, making sure they can come out of their hospitals into the community more quickly. And of course, when you're thinking about a whole health and social care economy, and remembering, of course, that the health service, the NHS in Wales, it's the biggest budget that the Welsh Government have, and anything we can do to make that more efficient. The difficulty, of course, that we have is that so often any sort of reform, you know, is, you know, you've got the big, you know, it's an uncomfortable thing, but you've got the huge bastions there, you know, you've got the BMA and you've got the unions and so forth, and everyone's trying to protect their issue. But I think what we've got to do is communicate what's important in our communities. It's about people. It's about the resilience of making sure that we've got, I mean, in North Wales, the most beautiful part of the world to live in, but we've got to have jobs. We've got to look at how we house people. I think there's got to be an issue about multi-generational living in a way that we don't see today. And I think most importantly, for me, I think we've got to actually respect everybody for the contribution that they're making. And for somebody that represents many tens of thousands of people who work in the independent sector of social care in Wales, I can tell you quite categorically, we need to respect more those people that actually are at the front line. They've been at the front line throughout this global pandemic. They're a tremendous group of people, and we're going to need more of them. And I think Professor Rhiannon, Vice-Chancellor, all alluding to this issue that, you know, we've got to age well. Care homes, if you want to say, they're not for people to get to 65 and then you suddenly go into a care home, or I'd be in one now. It's nothing to do with age, it's all to do with needs. And one of the biggest engines coming down that track is the prevalence of dementia in an older population. We need to find much more intelligent ways of dealing with this, using technology, using other support systems, but making sure that we're able to have enough facilities in a country of 3.2, 3.3 million people that is aging, to make sure everybody receives a consistent and fair level of support to meet their daily needs. Thank you.
So Mary, there's a whole load of stuff in there that we're going to pick through in our conversation a bit later. Interested to hear about issues around how people understand what's going on where they are and where they live, and feel able to contribute to the decision making that affects them. And obviously from us as the IWA, with a keen interest in democracy, there's all sorts of things that we can talk through about that. I think the issue around communication is an interesting one, and the issues around values. And I think there's some assumption around that we have a shared set of values across everything. I'd challenge that. I don't think everybody necessarily does, but let's come back to that. I'm interested to hear from people in the event today what good examples they can share with us around things like multi-generational living across the country, because I know that we've got people from right across Wales and also England as well joining us today. And then I think the issue about respect for both the contributions that people are making, and you know, I think your example around the NHS, for instance, was an interesting one. People are still very much contributing from the point of their institution, rather than necessarily thinking about what's the shared outcome we're trying to achieve, and how do we put aside those perceived institutional ownership of issues to say, well, actually, what's the shared outcome? What's my contribution to this? Do I need to take credit for this? Probably not, because what matters is the outcome for the person concerned. And then tech to address the challenges of aging, particularly, but not only dementia. Kerry, you're looking at this from a very different perspective, aren't you? From the point of view of where you are, what you do, and how you work with other organisations. Could you set out for people, not everybody will necessarily know Cymru Bro Festiniol, could you set out a little bit about what you do for a start, and then tell us about your 5 actions? And I know that you had this brilliant conference a couple of weeks ago that I want to pull on as well, in terms of some of that thinking and some of the assumptions around people feeling they have to leave to then come back later on in life.
Yeah, brilliant. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Mechanic, thanks for the offer. Sorry, I hadn't really prepared for this, for the 5 actions. But yeah,
Don't worry.
I'm not worried. So I work for Cymru Bro, and we work across the community, from youth homelessness to community tourism to the environmental projects. So yeah, I think we need to plan for the coming crisis together, which we have always done as communities, planning together, working together, mutual aid. But I think there's a role for those who control the assets and community organisations coming together: Welsh Government, health boards, housing associations, and community organisations. And we need to set these principles now. I think mutual aid include practical help like food or heating, but we also need to ensure that families are not isolated, are involved in cultural activities, and we don't need to label and stigmatise. I think that's always been an issue, and during COVID everyone was in the same kind of boat, if you like, and it showed the best of our communities, but not just of our communities, but how local authorities and the Welsh Government facilitated community action, because they realised that communities are best placed to support communities, and that's something we really need to tackle. So it's community in action, communal kitchens, heated social spaces, help with job applications, childcare. We support pay what you can afford with no stigma and general support. I think supermarkets, you know, we have one supermarket in Blaenau Ffestiniog, so they have a captive audience and it's the cooperative. But we have some, you know, they have 3 levels of prices in the UK, and in Blaenau Ffestiniog is the highest price. So that's ridiculous. We need to talk to our supermarkets and the role they play within communities. And then look at the spaces we have in school kitchens. Can we utilise them better? You know, it's a resource that could also be used for community halls, school playgrounds. So we need to audit what's currently available and work within existing groups who have the infrastructure. But it's all about what we can do together. The ideas reside with us. But just to go back to Rhiannon's first slide, and this might be controversial, but we own the gold in North Wales, but we live in an extractive economy from tourism to energy, and it's not rocket science. We need to own some of that resource and make sure it benefits our community long term.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Kerry. That's a really good challenge. I'm just thinking you need to get Jack Munro as a campaigner on the issue around the co-op pricing.
Absolutely.
You know, there's something to pick up on. Should sort that out for you.
Thanks.
I hope. And the challenge in particular around ownership is really important, and something that from the IWA perspective we're right there. So looking at, for instance, the Re-Energising Wales work that we did, making sure that community energy is both generated and the benefits accrue locally, but also a piece of work that we did last year around the time of the Senate elections, the Welsh Places Charter, looking at how different places have both come through COVID, and then a piece of work that the Means did for us actually later in the year, looking at resilience as well.
It's quite ironic actually, because it was 21 degrees here last week and it's snowing here today. And I think it's quite, you know, and then with the fuel prices going up tomorrow, there's going to be a challenge. We work above an office downstairs which acts as the local kind of food bank, CAB, because they've been taken away from the area. So yeah, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but I think it is about owning that resource. In our area alone, small hydro schemes create 133% of our energy needs, and that's just on small hydro. So we need to look at energy local models, and where the grid feeds, and local energy systems, I think. Local energy,
absolutely.
Sorry, models.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry.
You know, and we've been bringing the issue around the grid to the attention of the First Minister and others, looking at making sure that the grid is place specific as well, rather than place agnostic across Wales, because each different part of Wales will have very different energy requirements. There's obviously some trickiness there in terms of what's reserved to Westminster and what's devolved to Wales in terms of that energy management. Rhiannon, just before the break then, we're going to come back to you, please, for your 5 top issues. Thank you, Kerry. Diolch yn fawr. Rhiannon, over to you for your top 5, please. You're on mute. I'm going to ask you to unmute it there. Hang on a sec, you're still on mute. You're still on mute. I can't hear you just yet. I know it can be fiddly sometimes. There
right,
we go.
I'm now unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Lovely, thank you. Well, I think there are issues about corporation tax, which Ireland have, and they may be outside of the realms of what we can do within Wales, but we should be lobbying for that to bring big industry into Wales. I think a big push on green energy, retraining and encouraging our young people to go to university locally, and to, not that university is everything, there are lots of other options for young people. I think there needs to be a real rethink on planning, you know, local planning about communities, and we've seen local leisure centres taken over. We've seen, you know, fascinated to hear about Prof Rhiannon. Local people are doing a lot of what was done statutorily before, as are the housing associations. Housing associations are taking a huge burden of what was done before we had local authority cuts, and that's why I referred back to the decade of austerity. So recognising the need for investment and making sure that the infrastructure that visitors appreciate is just as good for the people who are here all year round. You know, we need to make it an attractive place for families to move in, and to promote multiculturalism, to welcome refugees, because actually they will enhance our community. We can protect our Welsh language. I'm still a learner, but we can protect it, but also welcoming that richness of culture. You know, I hope we will have some Ukrainian students and some other people caught up in that awful conflict now coming to live in North Wales, and they will thoroughly enhance our environment and provide extra workforce. So I think I've covered about 5, but I can contribute further after the session.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Rhiannon, and very good points about infrastructure for local people being as good, if not better, than those for visitors on the one hand, but also the value of all sorts of benefits that refugees can bring to a place. We're going to break now for a comfort break for 15 minutes. So coming back just before 11:15, please. So please leave the Zoom thing open. Turn your cameras off, panelists, as well. And we'll see you back here for 11:15 to pick up the conversation and develop it further. Diolch yn fawr, thank you. Brilliant. We've got lots to pick up on from the conversation we've just been having, and the challenges from our panelists around what the particular context is for North Wales and the challenges coming at us both now and down the line. So issues around demographics, who's coming to the region, are they the same as the locals, or how are they different? What are their different needs and different stages of the life course too? That gap there, the cost of wellness around the social and financial cost of where communities are in the region. How do we think about preparing for things getting worse? You know, we have a window now to prepare for next winter, for instance. What are the key things that need to be done now? And we already know about the cost of fuel going up, doubling most likely from about £1,500 to £3,000 over the next few months. Average family food bill increasing from £64 a week to £80 a week. Issues around use of food banks as the cost of living skyrockets. Rent arrears likely to increase. Hypothermia issues for older people next winter as well. I want to pick up, Sibani, with you in a minute, please, around integration of new populations in Wales, whether Ukrainian, Afghan, or indeed Syrian as well, because I think sometimes it's easy to focus on the most recent need for refugee housing, but actually there are lots of refugees who currently need permanent accommodation, and certainly Afghans living in temporary accommodation 9 months after they first arrived.
Yes, so I shall be grateful, yes. Yes.
Ivani, maybe could you pick up on that now, please? Could you tell me a little bit about, you know, I think sometimes the perception can be, I'm not saying that it is, I think it can be, that North Wales is predominantly a white community. How much do you think that's changing?
Changing, but very, very, very slowly, Oriel, very slowly, very slowly. Many people, educated, highly educated people, some authors, they're saying we do not have any problem here. So we do not need that your organization of integration. We do not need it here. Very clear. Okay.
And what sort of, so you may have people who are highly educated coming from into either an academic or a business role, in fact. But can you talk to me a little bit about the kinds of work that your organization does to make sure that people are both integrated and have voice in decisions that affect them?
It's very difficult. I'm running from pillar to post. Also, there's a lack of integration with other similar organizations. They do not want to work together. I have spoken repeatedly to community cohesion officers appointed by Welsh government, 24 of them. I think we have got 6 in North Wales. I keep on asking them, begging them for help, but they are helpless. They clearly say that we are helpless. We cannot help you in that case. Okay, so issue in terms of connecting with other like-minded organizations across. Very much so, yes, yes. Right. Yes. That's but we are still keeping, sorry, keep fighting. And regarding the Ukrainian refugees, our president, Noam's president, Mark Isharud, assembly member, he informed us that we have to do that. It is coming up, we should help them. But how? The council, local council doesn't help us. We have been writing to them and talking to them, and they do up their own ways, and they don't want to involve us somehow or other. I do not know.
Okay, that's interesting. So talking to the local council, but not feeling that you're getting much back in return in terms of practical assistance, but also that they don't know the value of the work that you're doing.
And absolutely, recognition is not there. The recognition is there. I am very grateful to you for inviting me here, but that recognition is not there.
Well, I'd be interested to pick up with you afterwards, actually, to have a more detailed conversation. Certainly.
Yes, thank you.
I want to go back to this the question around heating as well. Kerry, let's come to you for this one. I'm going to ask you to start your video and come back into view, if you would, please. You know, a third of rural properties in Wales aren't on the gas grid, so they're using oil for heating. We know that, and obviously there's really big crossover with homes with poor energy efficiency. So, you know, 36% of North Wales homes are E or below in terms of their EPC certificates. And it's so much harder to convert these homes to electric heating, like heat pumps. Can you tell me a little bit about, is there anything that you have done supporting communities in Bro Festiniog about this, so that we can share that learning more widely? Because I think some of these conversations happen in very small bubbles, don't they? People know a lot about their thing, but don't necessarily know where to get started.
We're in the middle of a scheme at the moment, working with a company called Sustainable Energy, the housing associations and Gwynedd County Council. There's a housing estate just down the road that suffered 46% fuel poverty before this crisis hits. And it's an old stock of social housing. You know, we own some of the oldest housing stock in Europe, as you know, and what you were alluding to there about. But yeah, so what we're looking at is a district heating network with heat pumps, but heat pumps aren't also the best solution either. There's a lot of education needed around grounds heat pumps, and people are scared. So at the moment, our coalman has never been so busy. And people are feeling, you know, we're getting all this pressure about climate justice, which is fair enough, the social justice. But you know, we're at the moment, the practical stuff we're actually doing is doing a log bank. So working with the NRW and felled trees and just making log banks available across the community so people can help themselves to logs. Sorry, I'm digressing, but we are working with the housing associations on trying to insulate and bring up the housing stock, but it's really difficult. You know, it's all to do with, we're working with Energy Local in Bethesda as well, where the local, if families club together or houses club together, they can buy the energy direct from the energy that is created locally, and that's the, you know, our local quarry creates enough hydro energy to power 500 houses, but that's sold directly to the grid. There are models where that can be sold directly to communities, either by direct wire or working with a energy company. Sorry, that was a massive ramble. No, so much going on.
There's also a push, isn't there, for communities that live near local energy producing schemes to have lower energy costs as a result, because of the work that they've done getting that. We'd like to see certainly more of that in future.
Yeah.
There's a really good point from John Galanders. Thank you very much indeed, John, for reminding us all that not all migrants, whether refugee, asylum seekers or economic migrants, are directly visible because they're not always of colour, and the welcome that Wales gives across the board. So thanks, John, for that. Absolutely, totally agree with you, having worked in humanitarian disasters for many years before returning to Wales. Can I pick up on a question that's come through around And Mary, I'm going to come to you with this, please, because I think this impacts quite a lot on your workforce as well, you know, the members of Care for in Wales. We've talked about how North Wales has got a lower population density than many other areas across Wales and neighbouring regions of England. So there are both longer journeys to work in the first instance, no matter what kind of work you do, and a higher rate of car use. And obviously that's a critical issue, isn't it, for care workers in terms of how they're paid. This obviously now is going to increase vulnerability to oil price shocks, and in the longer term is going to increase reliance on electric vehicles compared to large city regions in South Wales with greater, potentially, fingers crossed, public transport, connectivity and so forth. And electric vehicles in any case are out of the reach of most household budgets, and they're still much more expensive. How do you think we can shield people, and I'm thinking particularly your staff, from this sort of disproportionate impact? And I know that there's a really live issue at the moment around the costs of care and what is covered by local authorities and what isn't, between North and South, I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue of the North-South divide has never been greater. So if I can just put that one out there to those listening, and then I'll come on to the fuel aspect in a moment. But if you think that in the most recent settlement post-COVID, that Welsh government has really stepped up to the plate and put resources into social care spending, and bearing in mind what I said earlier about the importance of social care in all its forms being essentially the foundation of the NHS, which is obviously the biggest Welsh government budget, it has been utterly remarkable to learn in the last week or so the difference between some of the settlements in South Wales compared with the North. Now, you know, we've seen increases, and this applies to domiciliary care as well, which is very much around the issue of staff and travelling around rural communities to care for people. We've seen across North Wales 6 and 7% increases. Now, many people will say, well, that's fair enough, but in Torfaen, we've seen a 25% increase. So what we've got is a North, I mean, we've always had, for years now, Cardiff, Vale of Glamorgan, Newport. There's always been a disparity in funding, and the fees paid to care homes, the fees paid to domiciliary care. But, you know, to now be in a position where somebody receiving care in a rural community in Gwynedd, say, for exactly the same care as Torfaen, is something like £11,000 a year less, is utterly remarkable, utterly remarkable. And clearly that is something that will run in the weeks ahead. But when you translate that back, and this has been the problem, and it plays into this issue around, you know, fuel poverty and the ability of people. We know many people now who are actually leaving domiciliary care and working in care homes because they don't have to travel, because they can't afford the petrol. Now, that's great if you're short-staffed and you're running a care home. But if you've got a domiciliary care agency, and I have a small agency in Wrexham, it's not as prevalent for me as it would be in parts of, you know, rural North Wales. But you just cannot sustain not only the fuel cost, but the running cost of a car. And what you've got to understand, and this is just a point to end really for this, is that what we've always done over a quarter of a century is look at the cost of care, not the value of care. And I would have thought it has taken a global pandemic to change some of the perception. When I talked about respect earlier, you know, we've got to find a way of ensuring that these people are respected right across the board in whatever that means. And if they can't afford to put the fuel in the car to go and care for somebody in their own home, what is the result of that? If they don't have a family, or a family unable to care, that could well be, talk about well-being, then you're into another situation, which could even be a hospital admission. Yeah. So when you look at this, we've had local authorities in North Wales working back from a toolkit where the numbers don't add up, it's been manipulated, it's essentially been a cartel. And what we've ended up with is a complete pickle, because we've now got very shortages of staff in domiciliary care and real issues around care homes, particularly small care homes in rural communities under great pressure and being forced to close. We've seen a couple of closures in the last few weeks, and there's going to be more. What is the result of that? Well, we'll have to wait and see, because what we've got is an NHS under great pressure. So we've got to find a sensible way of doing this, and it needs a more consistent approach. You know, to go back to the point I just made, it does seem to, I'm sure most people listening to this will not understand why a service to exactly the same regulatory requirements, to exactly the same quality, can be £11,000 different in Torfaen than in any of the 6 North Wales authorities.
So it's a big postcode lottery in terms of where you are in Wales, what that means for that community business, and what that means for the person. Because if we're trying to keep people living where they want to live, as active as possible, as long as possible, then all of that is countermanding the ability to do that. Thank you, Mario. Rhiannon, I'm going to come back to you, please, because obviously, you know, your focus in terms of well-becoming is really important. And I speak as a woman in my 50s. I'm running the next in my series of half marathons a week on Sunday. So I'm hoping that bodes well for when I'm my mother's age. Longer retirement, obviously, in relation to working life, is shifting that overall lifetime tax burden ever more onto those below pension age. So, you know, the you and me of that generation. It's being compounded, obviously, by tax policy from the UK government, increasing national insurance, but cutting income tax, for example. Do you see this as being sustainable, and what are your views on the kind of hypothecation of taxes? So the ring fencing of taxes used for specific things. I know that there's a really live debate in North Wales around the hypothecation of any future local tourism taxes, and I'm sure there'll be a lively discussion in the chat as soon as I mention that. But let's just look at the other chunk of that first, please.
Well, very briefly, I certainly am not hearing any evidence of levelling up between South Wales and North Wales, or England and other areas of the UK. I think that I suppose in terms of hypothecated taxes, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because we insure our cars, we insure our homes, and we don't buy insurance for our old age. And I think that is a discussion that the public need to have. I really like the point that was made earlier about multi-generational living, because I think we have ended up where many people due to work are a long way away from relatives. We've moved a long way away from models where children can benefit from grandparents close by, and there are many benefits from, I think, multi-generational living, and the economic value of grandparents is astonishing. You know, I mean, the fact that they are freeing up parents to go to work in terms of unpaid childcare is not recognised sufficiently. So just to return to your final point about the hypothecated tax, I mean, it does give government less freedom if there are budgets that are ring-fenced. I think the point made earlier about locality, and it ties in with the point I made about we are facing a decade of growing inequalities, and inequalities in very small areas at a very small area. You know, within 10 miles there'll be a big difference between house prices, within facilities, earning power, lifetime opportunities for children. So we really need to think about trying to reduce those inequalities and making the economic opportunities of North Wales, which, let's be honest, I mean, the return on investment of the coastal part around Wales is massive. It's something like £84 for every pound spent. We do need to benefit from these, but we have to make sure that it benefits the lifestyles of those who are servicing those holidays for people.
Yeah, so there's some thinking about the circularity of funding.
Yeah.
So let's pick up on that funding issue there, because we know that North Wales is more reliant than the south of the country in some ways in terms of relationships with UK government or English regions, and particularly in terms of strategic funding for economic development through Levelling Up, Shared Prosperity Fund, and the cross-border use of services such as hospitals and schools. You'll be pleased to know, I'm sure many of you, that we've been doing our bit as the IWA to educate UK government officials on both devolution, how it works and what matters and how things look from this particular part of the country. Just this week, actually, we had a number of UK government officials come and learn more. And we've also done some work on the Levelling Up Fund in particular, and I'm going to ask one of the IWA team to put the link to that chat, to link that paper in the chat. We've made some recommendations in that for the next phase of how that is both planned, organised, what kind of accountability to citizens there is for the strategic use of that funding post-EU funding. And we've also done a lot of work on precisely what we've been talking about through this conversation now, around the differences between different places. So there's a tool that some of you, I hope, will have known and used and have come to love, because over 15,000 people across Wales have used it already. But those of you who haven't yet discovered understandingwelshplaces.wales, do please go and have a look. We're really hoping to update it with new census data. So last year's census data, we hope will flow through it later on this year seamlessly. And we'll be able to pick up very much in terms of what are the assets of a place, because I think the language really matters. Let's not talk about the deficits of a place. Let's talk about the assets and enable people to understand what the story of that place was in the past, what is the story now, and what do people living and working there want the story to be in future. And that's going to look and feel very differently, whether you're in Llanberis or whether you're in Porthmadog, for instance. I want to pick up then on this very complicated system of governance. So we've picked up today on where and how decisions are made. We've got CJCs, corporate joint committees, coming into the mix. We've got local authorities, we've got city deals, we've got community and town councils with a very narrow range of councillors on them. That I know that we've got some councillors with us today. And Lena, I'm looking at you and your excellent point about, and your question, which I'm going to come to in a minute. So I'm just putting that out there as a kind of framing for the next stage, which is very much picking up on the conversations and the questions back from today's audience. And first of all, I'm going to go to John Galander's question. And John has retired, I understand, from running a VOW in Wrexham, the Association of Voluntary Organisations for Wrexham. So I hope you're enjoying doing different things now, John. We hear a lot about the impact of COVID and how we need to get out of the problems and get back to pre-pandemic. And is this really the mindset that we should be looking at as we had failing health and social care before COVID? How do we ensure going forward that we're aspirational for a much better post-pandemic society rather than replicating the past? Rhiannon, I'm going to come to you with that first. I'm not going to come to everybody with every single question, because we've got too many questions and I want everybody's questions to be heard.
I need you to just shortly rephrase that, because that's quite a long question.
Yeah, okay. How do we ensure that we are aspirational and ambitious for a much better post-pandemic society? Let's not go back to the past. There were lots of problems before. How do we build back in a better way?
I do agree with that point. And I also take on board the point that was made earlier about North Wales, quote, owning its assets, cultural, environmental, power. You know, we need a bit of rebargaining, I think, and some challenging of inequalities. So yes, I mean, reading the North Wales framework document, you know, it's a splendid document, but the implementation section at the end is just saying we need ways forward now. So I think the next phase is probably another document to follow on from that through the ambition board, which actually sets out some concrete policies. And it is difficult because we have fragmented decision making, and that is very difficult to address that. But there is no, people use the phrase a new normal, don't they? And I think that is far more, you know, I have children in their 20s, and I just shake my head thinking, gosh, what you've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is more than, you know, more than I did in my lifetime, in terms of really enormous things happening. But a lot of good can come out of this. And I think the emphasis of what we're seeing from Bro Festiniog is example of amazing activity on the ground, amazing people, amazing generosity, but actually that shouldn't be taking over from what statutory services should be doing.
It's complementary, isn't it? Yes, and we'd love to clone Bro Festiniog right around the country. And I know that you're instrumental in the community movement as well, community movement Cymru too. Aid has asked a question on why we, Kerry, I'm going to come to you with this. Why are we continuing, or why is there a continuation of focus on jobs in terms of tourism and not manufacturing? Because it's no wonder that people continue to leave North Wales rather than put up with traditionally low-paid seasonal jobs. Don't we need to reduce miles, not just on food, but also on essential products?
Yeah, I agree. In the sector here, so regards tourism, I completely agree. What we've tried to do in Bangor University is, you talked earlier about the mountain-bike centre and the adventure tourism in the area. We were sort of a catalyst for that, good and bad. But what we're doing with tourism money is, okay, they are jobs. Some of them are quite well paid, but some we see them as stepping stones as well. So we work with the young people within the community. So it's a summer job, but they get to learn about branding, get to learn about hospitality and that kind of stuff. But what we're doing is redirecting that tourism money to buy properties on the high street, because so the profit we make from that. So we don't look as a job. It's a strange thing to say, you know, high value jobs, manufacturing definitely, but what kind of manufacturing, I'm not sure. Within the social businesses here, we employ over 150 people. So that's the care sector, tourism sector, the creative sector, energy sector, and we try and pull that together. But there are small local private firms anchored in the community that employ over 60 people, like D&C, who do building infrastructure and stuff. So it's a very difficult question. What we're trying to do as a local economy, locally led economic regeneration and work, is try to bring everything together. So we work with the local school about the opportunities available within the area, and you know, this remote working and stuff now, which appeals to people from the outside coming in, but should also appeal to the people already living here. And you alluded to the ways forward research we did. We did some community research with Manchester Business School over the last year or so. And what we found was that young people wanted to stay in the area. We just need to work with governments and local authorities and together to make sure that the environment is suitable for them to be able to, so that you're not encouraged to leave, because there's no sixth form in this area. So the first thing you're encouraged to do is leave this area for your education, for your opportunities. But people don't want, so we have 136 young people leaving this community every day at about 6:30 to 7 o'clock in the morning and not coming back till 6 o'clock in the evening. You know, it's that kind of, so they're encouraged to, so they don't participate in the community. Sorry, I'm rambling, but it's creating, they don't get to access the opportunities. So that's what we're trying to highlight, really. Again, I am rambling, but I tend to do that. So yeah, sorry.
It's all connected, Kerry. So I think that's what's really useful. And I'm going to pick up on Lena's point here, which is, you know, she talks about living and working. Sibani, I'm going to come to you next. Lena's talking about living and working here in North Wales. For every young person who wants to stay in North Wales, there are many who want to leave. And she's saying, why should older people be pressurising younger people to stay here for training if it isn't always the best place for them to be trained, obviously, depending on what you do. We'll come back to that in a minute, because I know, Sibani, you wanted to come back on the point around hospitality and tourism.
Yes, absolutely. And coincidentally, we share a tourism office in Colwyn Bay. And I know Jim Jones, the CEO of tourism, very well. And he's trying personally his best to promote tourism worldwide. I know that, I know it. But internally, with many aspects which is being neglected, as you said, hospitality and tourism is not properly working together. They're one, in fact, in the two peas in a pod. That's my opinion, but it is not, practically it is no. And one simple, because time shortage, one simple example I'll give it to you right now. In many countries I've seen, there are restaurants served with local food, Welsh food, for example, here, with the costumes, all this waiter and waitresses in Welsh costumes, and all other paraphernalia, all this decoration is absolutely local and here as well. But I do not see that with Welsh food and everything. I think myself is lacking that kind of hospitality in here. Also, okay, there could be some regular performances or in Welsh performances for the tourists. There are loads of things, there's no time, but this little bit I can tell you now.
So making much more of Welsh culture and Welsh food in terms of local restaurants and local hospitality.
Yes, absolutely. Very much with the ambience of Wales.
Yeah, culture. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to pick up on the perennial problem around measuring what matters. And Nina Ruddle, who is from Wrexham Glyndŵr University, so welcome, Nina, ask a question about how do we measure prevention? It's really tricky. You know, so many variables to this, but prevention is so important, and supporting people to not become ill. So, Rhiannon, this is back to your particular interest, but also, Mary, I'm going to come to you on it as well. Obviously, the Future Generations Commissioner Sophie Howe's challenge has been to top slice 10% off that health budget, which, as we know, is more than half of the Welsh Government total budget, and put that top slice 10% into well-being, well-becoming. So is measuring prevention the only way that we can do that, or can we rethink how we measure? And I speak as somebody who oversaw the first kind of proof of concept of how what was then the Supporting People grant changed how people who were homeless or at risk of homelessness presented both to GPs and in terms of emergency hospital admissions as well. And that linked, some of that was a very straightforward ability to enable local authorities to use their data for research purposes and show that if you had this support, your pattern and use of essential services was very different as a result, and as a proof of concept. But what else, Rhiannon, could we be doing along that line?
Okay, so Nina, I just want to say I really like your question, and maybe you and I can get our heads together to talk about, you know, research methodology sometime, because actually, you know, part of the problem is proving the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of many preventative interventions. Because and you know, we can't always use randomized controlled trials. You know, that's the world of the medical and social scientists. We have to use a lot of other methods for proving effectiveness and cost effectiveness. I want to throw something else in, which is that we don't talk enough about addiction in prevention, because you know, there are many addictions: food, alcohol, smoking, lack of exercise, and as I mentioned earlier, if you're living in very, very difficult, challenging circumstances, it is very difficult to co-produce your own good health. But these are messages that need to, I think primary care has a massive role to play here, but there are also interventions like Slimming World and things like that on the high street, which are designed to be really effective, because they use behavioural science to enable people to buy in. They get the camaraderie, they get the reward. So we need to get a lot more clever about recognising addiction, B, and that's right across the board, from serious addiction through to just poor diet, and sometimes poor diet is due to lack of available good healthy food and the pricing of food. So this is not a blame comment I'm making, but I'm making a comment about the fact that prevention and lifestyle is about the opportunities you give people locally. Active travel, really important. You know, that being able to make it possible for people to walk and involve local buses or take their bike on the bus and things like that. So we can, to answer your question, Nina, directly, we can measure intermediate outcomes, okay? Footpaths, cycle paths, healthy food availability of support groups and things that can come. I think primary care, we mentioned social prescribing. Social prescribing is this idea of getting people interested and out there and tackling loneliness. But, you know, and these are a lot of things about community that has really reflects a fragmentation of community. You know, I see that even things like chapels in North Wales, where they're down to congregations of 4 or 5 elderly people, cultures change and new things will come in their place. But so I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Rhiannon. Mary, I'm going to come to you. How many of your Care for Us in Wales's workforce have got electric bikes, enabling them to get around smaller towns and locations and spot what's going on in a way that isn't paying for the same kind of fuel costs, for instance?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and one provider in Denbighshire has recently invested in some of these electric bikes. I don't have very much information on that, other than to say you do need to be having some safe roads to actually to ride them on, because I'm not sure, looking at the roads today, I used to ride bicycle quite a lot years ago, but I'm not so sure I'd be so keen today. But can I just go back to something that's just been said? I think, you know, we've got to use the difficulty in North Wales, haven't we? There is so many positive things that we can say, but going back to what John Galland has said before, and John comes up with, as we know, some very, very sensible, insightful ideas about these things. And, you know, social care, healthcare wasn't in a good place. So when we talk about well-being, I mean, prevention has always been better than cure. It will always be cheaper than cure. But we almost, as we're coming out of a pandemic, you know, I'm not sure how much time we've got to really research so much. We've really got to take actions that are going to make a difference quickly. If we're going to get those cancer waiting lists down, if we're going to make sure that the NHS can function, we've got to get determined action. And I think that's about leadership. And I do question whether the leadership that we have currently in North Wales, with the fragmentation of 6 local authorities, with this huge health board, one of the biggest in Europe, you know, Rhiannon talks about the Economic Ambition Board. I've got to say, I don't share her optimism, but I do wish it well. But I think we've got to use that difficulty, if you like. We are a rural community in large part. But, you know, something that I'm always mindful of, we're in parts of, well, more or less anywhere in North Wales, you're not much more than a couple of hours from the population of Australia. If you live in Northeast Wales, you're probably an hour from the population of Australia. The opportunity, not just for tourism, but for all sorts of manufacturing products, you know, food and so forth. There's so much we could do, but we've got to have leadership, and we've got to stop or break down the barriers, the things that get in the way, the bureaucracy. We've talked about intergenerational living already. You know, the planning aspects, the difficulties that we have. We've got a lot we could do very quickly, and I think that's what we need to consider.
Mario, thank you. Kerry, I'm going to come to you in terms of you know, your sense of, if the power was all yours, what would you do to shift this? So Mario's skepticism that he shared there in terms of how things are organised, yeah, and the complications of that. And we know that in Wales and elsewhere, it's not a thing that's unique to Wales, is it? there's often
maybe it's a lack of confidence.
habit of setting up a new group to do something rather than using what's already there. If you could organise it, how would you organise it?
I'd put all grant funding in bins across the high streets and people could help themselves and then spend it locally. No, that's being facetious. But I think there's a culture of, we need to be more confident, 100% we need to be more confident. Like I said earlier, we own the gold, we're not far from these big populations. We're a very desirable place, we create energy, food, the tourism project. But how would I organise these things? I would give the power to communities. And I'm not sure, but there needs to be an understanding of what communities are best placed to deliver, what the local authorities are best placed to deliver, and what Welsh Government is best placed to deliver. And that needs to be facilitated. And communities need a seat by the table. I'm not saying communities have all the answers, but they do have a lot of them. They know what's going on. And I'm not saying, you know, I can't take a regional approach. I call the North Wales Economic Ambition Board the Death Star, and we're the last of the rebellion. I find it really difficult. I don't know if we can organise regional. I think we're a community of communities and things have to be organised from community to community. That's how I see it. And we have succeeded to some extent on a local level. Like I say, the social enterprises and businesses employ over 150 people locally. In a town of 5,000, that is not bad going. And then we work closely with the local business sector. We're redeveloping the high street now. Like I said, we're buying empty properties on the high streets. And we are looking at the high street as a mixture of, we're never going to be like Betws-y-Goed or Llandudno Junction. We're not that kind of town. So we're not going to be a tourism hotspot, but we can have a mix, a hybrid mix of housing, services and shops on the high streets. And if they're owned locally, then the profit is invested back locally. There's a long way to go, but all the communities need is facilitation and an equal playing field when it comes to economic investment, and not rely on these big infrastructural projects. They don't suit North Wales, or they don't suit communities in North Wales. They suit certain, spots of North Wales. Sorry.
No, there's no need to apologise for what you're saying. It's great. I just encourage those of you picking up on this issue around what is possible at a local high street level to go back and look at our archive of events. I think it was November 2020, we did a series of a Understanding Welsh Places Festival where we looked precisely at what had happened in different high streets across Wales. So there's some really good examples from Ceredigion, there's some really good examples from the Valleys, there's some really good examples from I can't remember the name of the quarter in Scotland that had been facilitated by the Carnegie UK Trust, using arts as well to get local people involved and younger people involved in reinvigorating empty properties on the high street. Do have a look at that, and we'll try and put a link to that in the chat. Pretty sure it was November 2020 for IWA folks searching our archives. Brilliant, well done, Will. We have only a few minutes left. So I'm just going to sort of flag up a couple of other questions that have come through. One is obviously, you know, those of you who know us well will know there's no surprise that we've said that up to a third of new renewables should be owned either directly or indirectly by Welsh citizens and communities. And our Re-energising Wales gives us real confidence that that can be achieved. And there's been a lot greater focus on renewables as a result of that big piece of work that we reported on in 2019. We also did a follow-up at the end of last year, looking at Welsh Government's progress against that and saying where there needed to be greater focus. And we do think that homes and the is a locus of both that investment and also a set of opportunities for jobs. So in terms of insulation and so forth. And the retraining of people. We've done a piece of work in January this year, talking to gas boiler engineers across the country, asking them, do they know what's coming at them down the tracks, hurtling towards them at the tracks in terms of net zero and what that means for their business? And yes, the kind of infrastructure organisations know that, but the individuals who are running those businesses, they don't. what happens and how does that shift then change, because that has all sorts of implications in terms of how people are supported to feel warm, safe, supported, and then able to go off and do whatever it is, work, education, training. There's another question around, would it be possible to map unconscious biases in Wales to establish a grounding for raising awareness about what we all have our unconscious biases, and I think there's been much greater awareness of that in the last few years, obviously, and how the decisions that we make are affected by those, or our perceptions of what is possible are affected by those. I'm just picking up on the chat. Conwy Town High Street, thank you, Sibani. Carwyn saying, should we refer to specific places and towns and not North Wales? Very good point. Absolutely. And yes, Lena, South Wales isn't an entity either. I think we're just trying to be as inclusive as possible in terms of the kind of broader geographic focus. I'd really like to say a little bit about some of the themes that have come out of the conversation that I've heard today over the last couple of hours. One is around that I want you to think about as you go away into what you're doing next. So framing issues and services in terms of value, not in terms of their cost, and the value to people, to communities, where they are, where they're living and working. That's the first thing. How do we locate decision making at the right level to best serve communities? That's a thorny issue that we haven't got right yet, and we need to work harder, faster on it. How do we just get on with it and fund what we know works alongside exploring new solutions? So less chats and more action. I think there's also a role here, though, for the connecting up. And I'm really pleased, because I think this is something that has also come through the conversation today. A lot of us are still in our silos in terms of either this is the service that we're producing or delivering, and actually not thinking, and I think John mentioned it in the chat, John Galanders, about how people don't really care about who delivers what, they just want what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. So a much greater focus on that. But to enable that to happen, there's got to be connective tissue between the people doing all of those different activities. And certainly from our point of view at the IWA, because we don't represent a sector, trade or interest, we hope that we're part of that connective tissue, connecting the issues as well that look differently in different parts of the country. And that's obviously, you know, our last point around how different communities and regions need different solutions to issues. It cannot be a one size fits all. And I think, Kerry, your brilliant example, which I didn't know about before, was the local log banks in Brofesiniog. So that was brilliant. So thank you very much indeed. So it just remains to me to thank our panelists, please, to Professor Rhiannon Edwards for your brilliant introduction and presentation. Thank you, Rhiannon. Dr. Sibani Roy, thank you too. Mario Kreft, Kerry Cunnington, and particular thanks also to Professor Iwan Davies, Vice-Chancellor of Bangor University, for joining us today. Thank you to everybody who's attended. You're going to see you can already see a short feedback survey in the chat. Please do take a minute to complete it. We've got so many brilliant suggestions already in terms of other things that we could do, but in terms of issues that are particularly important, from everywhere from Nevin over to Wrexham, could you please say, what do you think are the topics that aren't being discussed that need to be discussed, and who would you think would be good to discuss them? That's what I'm interested in. We really aim to be as accessible as possible and working to make sure that attendees and panelists at our future physical and virtual events in this series can contribute in Welsh or English. I'm still a Welsh learner. I'm getting there slowly. Our aim is always to identify issues that need further thought, articulate clearly what they are, get people thinking about what needs to change, why, and crucially how, so that we can all play our own part in making Wales better. If you want to receive early notifications of future IWA events and all our work, all you have to do is join us as a member. You don't even have to go and look for our emails. They will arrive as if by magic in your inbox. Please do join us as a member and there's a link to the supporters page on our website. I'm a minute over time. Please forgive me. Thank you very much indeed. Diolch yn fawr.